All right, Camille, oh my gosh, so happy to meet you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So yeah, I want people to get to know you better. I mean, you're doing some incredible things, and you're the first woman to actually play like full time with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, ever.
Yeah,
To me, that's
two
like
seasons.
2 seasons. That's like monumental. So let's get into your history. Tell us, like where you're from. When did you start getting into music, and into woodwinds and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Well, I'm from Queens, a little town called St. Albans, which actually has a lot of jazz history there. And I started at the age of 12 on flute, and I ended up switching or adding saxophone my eighth grade year. And my band teacher, he was really supportive and encouraging and letting me explore all the woodwinds. His name was Peter Archer, and
I know him.
you do?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't like, I've heard of him. I may have met him once or twice, but wow. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's like a musical father to me. He literally nurtured me. When I first came to that school, I transferred from a school in St. Albans to Bayside, MS 74. And he was a band teacher there, and I just wanted to get out of chorus because I was like, I need to put my hand on an instrument. And he gave me trombone, and I was just in a car accident, and I was like, I want to play trumpet. And he was like, well, you can't play trumpet because you got a bruised lip and you got stitches. That's not going to work. So he gave me a flute, and I was like, okay. And I liked it my first year. And then I ended up finding a mouthpiece through my mom because she confiscated it. He gave me the flute, and after about a year or so, my mother, she had a mouthpiece that she confiscated from a kid because she was a school teacher. And I thought it was a clarinet mouthpiece, and I went to Mr. Archer, and I was like, can I play clarinet? And he was like, Thurmy, because that was his nickname he gave me. You can't play clarinet. And besides, it's a saxophone mouthpiece. And I was like, saxophone. And then that's what he told me. He was like, you can play saxophone, flute, and clarinet because all the fingerings are very similar. And if you do that, you can play in Broadway. And I was like, I want to play on Broadway. So I'm like in eighth grade, like, I'm going to play in Broadway. I'm going to play in Broadway. So I would spend my lunch periods just in his band room teaching myself all the fingerings to clarinet and to saxophone and comparing it with the flute. And he ended up bumping me into jazz band my senior year there. And he was the one that was really instrumental because he was the one that came to me and was like, Thurman, you're going to LaGuardia. And I was like, what's LaGuardia? And he was like, well, you're going to take an audition. He came to my house in the middle of summer break, I kid you not, with like a stack of books this thick, left it on my stoop and was like, practice these for the summer. I'll see you in September. You're taking your audition. So I was like, okay. And I ended up getting in, and my first 2 years was incredible because I had Bob Stewart as my jazz teacher, and he was just so nurturing and loving, and he had me exploring playing flute and saxophone, mainly saxophone, because he was like, well, if you're going to be in a big band, you got to play saxophone as your main. And that's why I ended up switching over. And then my last 2 years of high school was a little challenging because he left, and there was some changes in administration and in the teachers, and that's when stuff started happening with some of the guys in the band treating the women a little unfairly.
Oh, wow. What, if
Yeah.
you don't mind my asking, what, what years was that where that was happening?
I would say probably 2003, 2004.
Wow. What?
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. And it's funny because when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, the concept of sexism or gender discrimination or bias or racism, you're still formulating it. And in some cases, you don't exactly know the word. You feel that something is weird or different, but you don't know exactly how to explain it or describe it. So I knew something was weird. And us other girls, we would talk with each other, and we didn't know how to really communicate it because we knew it wasn't sexual abuse, it wasn't verbal abuse, but we knew it was some sort of form of treatment that was not right. And what ended up happening was things like we had 7 saxophonists, and of course you can only have 5 in a section. So myself and another girl, we played both of us played tenor, and we would literally sit the majority of the period waiting to play, because the teacher at that time, that for that particular year, he just let us pick our own parts for rotation. Rather than give us, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you play this tune. No, he left it to us. So, of course, me and her were like, oh, gosh, this is going to be rough. And sure enough, it was difficult those last 2 years.
Wow. And that's the worst thing, too, because that's your 11th grade and 12th grade years, before you're headed off to college and stuff like that. Wow.
Right. So we literally had to fight just to play. And even for our improvisation classes, we would take solos, and there were not all the guys, there's a few particular guys, they would kind of single us out and make fun of us and laugh at us. Get down.
Is that your dog?
That's my dog.
That's awesome. Wait, we gotta see the dog. We gotta see the dog.
Come on. My headphones. Say hi.
Oh, how cute. Is it a pit bull mix? I can't see.
He's a pit mix.
Oh, cool.
Hi. Okay, go to your bed. Bye. Okay.
I have 2 wily greyhounds, and we had a pit bull mix named the Ferocious Snuggles.
Oh.
She's ferocious when she ate, but oh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But that lightens the situation here. But what the way you described it so well, in the sense that you're right, at that age, you don't know what to call it. You don't know what it is. You know something's wrong. Your gut is screaming something's wrong here, and you're not sure what to do. I mean, the way you just described that, gosh, I know for myself, growing up playing trumpet, I know for a lot of women, instrumentalists, and probably vocalists too, what you just said, I think resonates.
Yeah. And the sad thing is, I think I know a lot of young women, they suffer in silence because they can't articulate it. And then that's the first step, being able to just articulate it to your teachers. And then, of course, the fear and the shame. And like for us, just playing a solo, we were so scared and nervous because we knew they were going to make fun of us. They would literally laugh in our face. And some of the guys would even, like for me particularly, I got into an all-city band, which is like a competitive band not for all the boroughs. And I was the only girl, and they literally came to my face and was like, you shouldn't be here. Why are you here? So-and-so should be here, not you. You suck. And you're just sitting there like, okay, I could tell my teacher this guy was really mean to me, but I know he's targeting me because I am a woman and I'm different. I know I could play, but they're treating me unfairly compared to their friends and their pals and peers.
You said something interesting with that. You said, I know I can play. And I think that was key.
Yeah.
But saying that right now, I mean, you felt that way, that at that time. Did you have enough confidence in your own abilities to be able to just, handle that?
No, and that's the thing, because for me, when I was about 16, 17 years old, they were verbalized it so much, these particular guys, that I actually started believing that I sucked and that I made the band terrible and that I made the band worse. Because they would say stuff like that all the time to me. And it was just kind of like, okay. And I was very shy too. So I heard that all the time, and I just kind of like closed in.
Oh, cringed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And, I talk about this all the time, how, you are your thoughts, and, those weren't even your thoughts, but they started to become your thoughts. And then you just showed this, like, for those people listening to the podcast, definitely watch this video, but, you showed yourself cringing. Your body language just went in, and I felt that. And so then let me ask you this, how did you survive those 2 years and recover from that?
It was a miracle, because at that time, there were 4 girls in the band, and we basically kind of made a pact with each other, particularly me and the other tenor player, because there was a time when they were pitting the both of us against each other. And they're like, well, yo, she's cute. I don't want you because you're not, whatever. And both of us talked, and we were like, listen, we know these guys are being jerks to us. Let's just promise that it doesn't affect our relationship, and let's just stick together. And the four of us, we stuck together. And even if we were dealing with it in other band situations, because it was concert band too, and there was another girl dealing with stuff like that in a different way, we just became really good friends, and we supported each other. The teacher at that time, because there were two teachers for the jazz bands, the second teacher, he was open to us and would let us come and join his classroom, and he would let us play. And of course, we had some guys that were our peers that saw what was happening, and they would of course say, hey, that's not cool, don't do that, or if you do that again, man, we'll see you at the school, that kind of stuff. So we were able to create our own support system within the band. But the unfortunate thing was the administration didn't act, and that's what made it hard, because there was no proof. It wasn't sexual abuse, it wasn't physical or physical abuse or anything of the sort. And when we went to administration, of course the teacher was like, okay guys, don't do it, but they're like, yeah, whatever. When it came to going to the next level, it was like, listen, we don't have any proof. And once they finally had proof, we were already graduating, and they suspended him like the last month of school, and we were just done.
Yeah. And you know what kills me about this too, in the 90s, I grew up in the 80s. And so, yeah, bullying was part of the culture and everything like that.
Right.
And as a kid, you know something's wrong, right? But you just don't realize it. You don't know how to verbalize it.
Right.
In the 90s, there was a big movement against bullying, in schools, especially the late part of the 90s and stuff. And it was prominent in the 2000s. And I'm really surprised at that administration, because I know administrations were jumping all over themselves to try to make sure that kids would not be bullied, or else they would get in trouble. I'm just so shocked as to, because bullying isn't just physical or verbal. I mean, you have the verbal stuff, but it's also emotional as well. And that's the worst type.
Yeah. And then a lot of us were suffering in silence because we couldn't, like I said, articulate it, and it was just happening. Like I remember waking up and dreading to go to school, and my parents are like, do you want us to? And I was just like, I'm just gonna have to do it, because if you show up, then it's gonna be even worse.
Right. Oh my gosh, yeah. I was just thinking in my head, I truly hope, that they either got rid of those people or solved this problem a few years later.
Well, I haven't really been in touch with the schools, and I don't know. But one thing I will say is, being a professional musician and going and doing workshops and clinics all around the world, I've been finding that this has been occurring, not just in my situation, but in a lot of young women's situations in school. And that's the thing that's kind of alarming, because when we think of band, first off, by the time they get to high school, there's not a lot of young girls, when we're talking jazz, in the jazz programs.
Yeah.
So you might maybe have one, maybe two or three or four. But again, it's that type of situation where it's like, well, who do I go to articulate this? And how do I explain what's happening? Because I don't really quite know what it is. Or I think I might know if you have a parent that kind of tells you, listen, this is what it is. But it's hard, and you're kind of left out there figuring it out on your own.
The cool thing that you did is that you guys made that pact, that
you
stuck to each other, and you did this beforehand, as opposed to when being too late and having been pitted against each other.
Right. Yeah, that was important to us, because we realized that we only had each other. And we were all going through this. And then of course some of the guys who saw what was happening and they were against it, they became our close friends, and they were really supportive in helping us feel and understand and know, look, this is wrong, and not all of us feel this way, and we want to try to help you in whatever way we can.
And the other added dynamic to this too, I mean, this is the high school for the performing arts, as opposed to just, all the other types of high schools. And here's where people are really serious about it. You're going to be more than likely making a career out of it.
Yeah,
and
it's competitive too.
Competitive, absolutely. But it's the connections. It's the connections you make. And, we always say to students that, and yeah, we say to students, you always want to put your best foot forward. You want to make
You
a good
do.
impression on people because people will remember. You may not be like the best player in the planet, but if you're good, easy to work with, you get along great with people, you're responsible, you're going to get the job as opposed to the person that thinks that they're the greatest gift since sliced bread. And, you
Exactly.
know,
But I think that's why it's important. I do sometimes workshops and clinics with educators, and I actually just did a Q&A session this past Wednesday with young women musicians and educators online.
oh,
And
great.
we talked about and emphasized the fact that for educators, they have the power to create a learning environment that is a safe haven for everybody. And I think in our situation, there was nobody really there to be that in between person advocating that. And it was just kind of left as, well, it's free for all. But when an educator steps in and says, look, this is a judgment free zone, there is no laughing at people for taking a solo. We're all supportive of each other. And on top of that, this is a safe space to learn. Now you're setting a platform where it's like, okay, this is the standard. We didn't have that. So we
Yeah.
didn't feel safe to learn. And for me, especially, by the time I got to my senior year and it was time for applying for auditions and whatnot, I felt like I didn't really get to take advantage of learning because I was so scared to learn there because it was
Wow.
scary.
Yeah, yeah. You're not in the right frame of mind.
No, you can't make a mistake. You can't do anything.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. It's so
Yeah,
sad to hear though, but let's continue on with your story because you
sure.
obviously got past that.
Yes. Well, I ended up going to Binghamton University and I majored in geological and environmental science. How I did that, my senior year in college, I aced my Regents exam. And the colleges that I wanted to get into, either A, I didn't get into them, or B, I got into them, but it was like $50,000-$60,000 a year. And my parents were just like, we love you, but we just don't have it.
Yeah.
And I ended up going to a community college my first semester and I aced it. And then after that, I transferred to Binghamton University. And it was there I met Michael Carbone, who was an amazing educator. And it's funny because I contacted him once I got there and he was like, well, we have auditions the first week of the semester. And I was like, okay, I'll be there. And I literally remember sitting in my dorm room, sitting on my bed, and I missed the audition because I was just in like a shock mode of like, I can't do it. My body and my spirit wanted to get up and go, but my mind was still trapped in like, no, I'm gonna make the band terrible. I suck. I'm horrible. I can't do this. They don't need me, and I shouldn't be playing. And the next day he saw me. He's like, "Where were you? I was waiting for you." And I was like, "You don't want me. I'm terrible. I suck."
Oh,
And he was like, "Where do you come up with these thoughts?" I was like, "This is what's been told to me." And I guess it's the case because this is all I've been told. And so he
wow.
told me to join him for an improv class. He's like, get your feet wet. And I was like, okay. And I showed up and I literally remember we were going down the line playing each a chorus from a Abersol blues track. And when it came to me, he had his back turned from us and he was doing paperwork. And when it came to me, from the first note, he dropped his papers and he turned around, looked at me, was like, you can play. I was like, no, I can't play. I'm terrible. And then after the class, everybody left and he sat with me. He was like, I don't get it. You could play, but you're telling me you can't play. And I told him my story and he was like, you just need a safe space to learn. And that's when it clicked. And I was like, you're right. I never really felt safe to learn because I was dealing with all of this crap.
Yeah.
And he was like, look, he looked me in the eye and he said, this space is safe for you to learn. The door is always open. If you want to come here and practice, you want to shed, anything you want to do, anything you want to learn, you can come here, you can come to me. This space is available. And that was the first time in my life, well, aside from middle school, but my first time as a young adult, I felt, wow, I can come here, I can learn, I can make mistakes, I can have fun figuring stuff out. I can have joy and not terror and fear for learning.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh, this is so powerful. And what my biggest takeaway right now, and maybe the podcast listeners will agree, but the power of your mind is
Mm-hmm.
is so paramount to how well you're going to do.
It
You know?
is.
I mean, you were playing well, yet your mind said no. And, and I'm sure that, when you played those first notes and he dropped his stuff, I'm sure it was really good, but I bet you if you didn't have all that garbage that was told to you over the years, that it would have been 100 times even more intense, like what you were playing. Do you know what I mean? Like the level of confidence that would have come out.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you said right there, confidence. For a lot of 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, in my case, I was struggling with that because I didn't have a space where that was being poured in. And also I didn't see it. I didn't see women playing instruments and playing jazz at a high level. It was just this girls kind of like, well, I guess we'll figure this out and what we're being told or not told.
I'm curious though, because this is, and by the way, people, folks, if you don't know, so LaGuardia School for the High School for the Performing Arts, that's where they filmed Fame. And I used to love that show and the movie and stuff. But I'm surprised, didn't they take you guys out on like field trips and stuff to go to, see jazz orchestras and the group Diva, like the Diva Jazz Orchestra and stuff?
We actually we went to a high school competition, a Berkeley high school competition, but most of the time we had different people come in. And the thing about LaGuardia is the music program is very wide. We have the classical part and we have the jazz. So anytime any kind of artist was coming in, we would all come and see it. Most of the time it was either Q&A. Every now and then it might be a direct workshop, masterclass kind of thing with just the ensemble. But every now and then it would happen. It wasn't like we were going out to see shows. But then also you got to understand it's the New York City public school system. So just to organize all of that, it's a lot. So the school was doing whatever they could to bring artists to us. But one thing I will say, in my particular case with jazz, part of the learning process is going out and seeing shows, and that is left honestly to the parents and to the children. And if you think about it, during that time, we were 16, 15. We couldn't go to the Village Vanguard and see somebody play.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the school was giving us some things, but that responsibility was kind of, I guess, more left to us and our parents. And for me, my dad was like, no, you can't go to a jam session on like a Wednesday, Thursday night at 9:00 in the city by yourself. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
For me, I missed out on being able to have that interaction because I was a minor.
Yeah, and there was no YouTube.
Right, and there was no YouTube.
That's right. You can't see this stuff online. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, holy cow. All right. So, sorry, I had to interject, but yeah, so heading back to Binghamton, and so now you started to feel more safe learning, and so talk about your experiences from that point.
Well, Michael, he brought in artists every semester. He brought in Sharon Maricoll, he brought in Steve Davis, he brought in Cynthia Scott. And one semester he brought in Tia Fuller. And I remember he was like, I'm going to get Tia Fuller to come here. And I was like, okay. I didn't know who she was at the time. I'm like, okay. And then he talked to me the next semester and was like, we got her. She's coming. And I was like, okay. And then she came to our rehearsal and I met her and I was like, wow, you're a woman. You play saxophone. And we look alike.
You have someone that you could recognize.
Yeah, I could see myself in you. And that's when it kind of hit me and I was just like, this exists. Okay, so you can be a great a great musician and be a woman. And on top of that, there is such thing as diversity. People do exist out there that look like you're doing it at a high level. And I never forget that experience because it was so much fun just getting to see her and watch her. And then afterwards we ended up talking and she pulled me aside and she's like, what are you doing up here? And I was like, I'm getting my degree in rocks and dirt. And she was like, no, seriously, what are you doing up here? This is the boonies. You can play. You should be in New York City. And I told her my experience. I was like, I don't know if I could make it as a musician. She was like, you could play. She's like, look at me. I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. And at the time she was touring with Beyonce and she was like, if I can do this, you can too. And it kind of just sunk into me. And my professor, he kind of looked and was like, So I made up my mind that day. I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. And I told my parents, I called them, and I was like, Mom and Dad, I know I'm in my junior year, but I'm going to finish this out and give you the degree, and I'm going to make a career as a professional musician. And they were, of course, mortified because they're both educators. And they're like, oh, my baby's going to be a broke musician. We invested in college. What about your degree? And they even went to my teacher and was like, we're coming to you. We're coming to you. And he just kind of laughed and chuckled. But thank God I made that decision because it changed my life.
Tia Fuller, really.
Tia and Michael, yeah.
They changed their lives. So after Binghamton, then what was your path?
Well, after Binghamton, I made an effort to make sure that the people that I met, the guest stars, each guest artist was like, here's my information. Hit me up when you come to the city. Because each of them would say, you need to come to the city. So I did that. And I hit up Tia. She was on the road at the time. And she was like, look, what you probably need right now is somebody just to kind of mentor or shadow. She's like, I can't because I'm literally on the road with Beyonce right now. But I got some friends that are really, really good mentors I think you should meet. And that's when I met Mimi Jones, a bassist. And she literally kind of took me under her wing and showed me the ropes of the scene. How do you show up for a gig? How do you prepare for a gig? How do you practice? All those things. And then on top of that, I ended up meeting Bruce Williams, who became my teacher once I got out. Because once I got out of college, I realized, okay, I need to spend some time and really get my stuff together because I can't just go out there and not work on my playing. And he helped whip me in shape. Abraham Burton, he was gracious to me. He taught me, but then also gave me a space to play and work it out. And every now and then he would come out with Eric McPherson and Shamrit Shashan, who's an amazing pianist. And they would kind of check on me and my best friend, Uni Mohiku, who's a player. And they'll be like, how you doing in there? How are you working on that stuff? I'm like, oh, we're figuring out. And they would come in and play with us. And then we'd go to jam sessions and they would host it and they would let us play.
Oh, wow.
So,
this is awesome.
Yeah. So it was a network of a lot of great mentors. Antoine Roney, when I first got to New York City, he was like, okay, here's the mouthpiece you need to play. Here's what you need to practice. And he would just literally like give me information every time I would hang out with him. And he became like a father figure to me on the saxophone. And everybody, Bill Saxon, same deal. He was like, all right, this is what you need to learn. If you're going to be playing tenor, this is what you need to do. And everybody just chipped in and helped literally build me so that I could be able to be on the scene and be prepared and be able to go forth and do this.
What's really cool is that you had the wherewithal to, with that conversation with Tia, and you keep the connection going.
Right.
And like you said, with every guest artist, you got their information, you exchanged information, and you had the courage to reach out to them. Because some people are too afraid to even do that. But by reaching out, whether you worked directly with them at that moment or not,
even later on.
But they connected you with other people. And you found the other mentors. That's a really great tip for people, regardless of how old you are or what genre of music you want to play. If you really do want to perform, this is the different side of networking. You know, that's really interesting.
Yeah, those relationships are essential, especially when you're first developing your career because they last a long time.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're still great friends with all those people.
Oh, yeah. They're my family.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So then fast forward, fast forward a number of years. What's the scene like for you? What are you doing?
Like how specific? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So, after you first got to New York City and these people were mentoring you and you're playing jam sessions and all that kind of stuff, when did you start to get your first like real big gigs and recordings and stuff? That's a better question.
To be honest, when you're a musician first hitting the scene, the first lesson you learn is say yes to every and any gig that comes by. So you're not necessarily playing all jazz gigs. You're playing everything. You're doing top 40 club dates. You're doing R&B gigs. You're doing hip hop gigs. I never forget somebody called me to be a saxophone gram, where basically I would show up in Central Park at a specific time and play a song while somebody's getting engaged.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, was a gig, but I took any and every gig that I could take. And then on top of that, I subbed in as many bands as I could, because it was another opportunity to meet musicians, but then also, most importantly, play. I tried to play as much as I could. And I think when you're a young musician emerging on the scene, it's essential that people hear you and they see you, and that it's consistently. And how you do that is by getting in as many playing situations as possible, because all those gigs lead to other gigs and other circles. And that's how I was able to get through my first couple of years on the scene. And that's what kept me my rent and my food on the table.
Yeah, I was going to say that because many people know New York is expensive, but they really don't understand how expensive it is.
Yeah. It's really expensive. I'll never forget my first couple of years, especially when it got warm. They cracked down now, but there was a time where people would practice in the parks and put their case out, and that's how they, they got their practice time in. But then also that was essential and bread and butter too.
Yeah. And now they don't allow that anymore?
They've cracked down. You need a permit now for certain places, like if you do it on the subway and whatnot.
Right, that I knew about, but yeah. Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, but honestly, it was part of the cultural life of the city. You would see that all the time. And then actually, after a while, you would get to know musicians. Like, oh, hey, yeah, that's so-and-so playing on the such and such between such and such and such and such and this day. So I'm going to leave that spot alone.
That's right, that's true. Or okay, on that train, that violinist is playing, and I'm going to make sure you run there and hear him and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. It became a scene because everybody's trying to just make it and survive, and at the same time work on their craft. So you appreciate it.
Definitely. All right, cool. So, you're surviving, you're making all these network connections. Mm-hmm. Then what happens after that? How do you get into your like biggest group, so to speak?
The first one was a gig with Nicholas Payton and his television studio orchestra. That was like my first official gig.
He's a great player.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
He's amazing. I met the son of John Coltrane, Robbie Coltrane, through my mentor, because her husband, Luis Perdomo, was playing in this group at the time. And she was like, Robbie, you got to meet Camille. She's really good, and she's a young saxophonist. I think it'll be great for the both of y'all and me. And when we met, we just kind of instantly hit, because he was really sweet and very sincere, and just like, wow, his spirit is just really genuine. And I guess I hope he felt the same way about me. And we ended up kind of staying in touch and whatnot. Every now and then we would hit each other up. And then I remember I came to see somebody at Dizzy's Club one time, and he was there. And he was like, oh, Camille, come on over here and sit with me. And I was just like, okay. So we sat down and we watched the show. It was Nick. He was playing there. And then Robbie said, hey, Nick, I got somebody I want to introduce you to. And Nick was like, all right, who? He was like, you got to check out Camille. She's really killing, and she's a great player. If you should hit her up for one of your gigs. And he was like, all right, cool. A year later, I got a call from his manager, and we ended up playing Symphony Hall in Chicago with this television studio orchestra. And that was because of Robbie. He put in a great word for me, but then also at the same time was really super sweet and loving and supportive, and saying, hey, this is the next generation coming up. She's good. Trust me. I give her my word. She's good.
You know what, though? It wasn't just because of Robbie. It was also because of all the stuff you've been saying.
That's right.
Keep that in mind. Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. So Nicholas Payton, one of my favorites, I got to say. So, okay. So after that, then, as we're evolving into what you're doing today. So then what was your next a project or adventure?
The next adventure after that, I was honestly doing a bunch of different things. I ended up releasing my first album project under Mimi Jones's label, Hot Tone Music, which got a really nice push because the three of us, myself, Shirzit, Tinin, and Mimi, we ended up releasing albums, and they did well. And it was kind of like the beginning, not the beginning, but like kind of one of the first early blips of the women in jazz kind of thing. Like, whoa, we got 3 women releasing albums, each individually being a leader. So that kind of, I guess, was a great thing. Yeah, and then on top of that, I was doing some teaching, and I was working with Jazz at Lincoln Center in the education program. And then I was also getting hired to do a bunch of different things. I ended up getting hired through Terri Carrington, through Tia, actually, to do a gig with her at the Howard Theater, which featured Jerry Allen and so many incredible musicians. And we were literally playing for people like Chaka Khan, Dianne Warwick, and whatnot. And that was my first time I got to network and play with other women in a large ensemble. And it was just like, whoa, this is really cool. And I ended up forming a great relationship with Terri, and she ended up hiring me again to record on Dianne Reeves' album, which ended up getting a Grammy, A Beautiful Life. And that's how I ended up meeting Dianne. So the relationships just started growing and growing from each gig. And then eventually one day I was on the road with my band through a program called American Music Abroad. And we were in Africa performing, and I got a call from Walter Blanding, and he was like, "Hey, Camille." And I was like, "Hey, Walter." And I knew of him, but I didn't know him personally. And I was just kind of like,
"Oh, okay.
How did he get my number?" But then again, I mean, it's New York. So, hey, word gets around. You need a person to contact. You want 6 degrees away from separation. You get it. So he called me, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he was like, "Well, I want to throw a proposition out there. If you're interested, let me know." And I said, "Okay, hit me." And he was like, "Well, Wynton and I were talking, and we were wondering, how would you feel with playing with the orchestra for an entire year? You'll be playing my chair." And I kind of was like, it was shocked because I was like, "Wait, what?" Like, is this really happening? It's 3 a.m. in Nigeria, and I got a phone call about joining the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra for a year.
Wow.
So I sat down and I was like, "Well, can I take a second to think about it?" Because in my head, I'm thinking, I got all these gigs that I booked for next year. I got to figure this out. So he was like, "Sure, take your time. Hit me up, the next day when you have a moment." And I hung up. The first thing I did, I called my mentors. And they all gave me the same conclusion. Do it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I ended up calling him back the next day, and I said, "Okay." I took care of my business on my end, and I said, "I'm available." And 1 year ended up being 2 years.
That's so awesome. And it's, your story is not only inspiring, but it's also it's so educational too, and it's aspirational too for people to for especially young women,
Yeah.
to look up to, because now you're paying it forward by what you're doing.
Yeah, it's surreal to see it that way, but it is. And I every time I get on stage, whether I'm with them or I'm with other people or with my own band, I'm always thinking of this is forward motion, because at one point people like William Barton, Vi Red, Vi Burnside, they all filled this seat, and now we're, in a way, they passed the torch to me, and now I'm hoping and praying that what I do is passing the torch to the next generation.
Yeah, that's so great. This is awesome. Now I want to take a little bit of a left turn because you also sing, and you've won awards for singing. So can you talk about that path?
Sure. Well, I actually kept singing a secret for a long time.
In secret.
I did. I mean, it's an interesting story because when you're a young student, particularly a young lady, and you're playing an instrument, I found myself always being questioned about whether or not I could play with the instrument on my back. And here I am, like 12, 13, 14 years old, on my way to school on the subway, and people are like, "Take out that horn right now. Prove to me you could play." And I was like, why do people feel like they have to question me?
Yeah.
But they don't do this to the guys.
Yeah.
And I remember I got an award, I think it was like 18 or 17, and this older gentleman, I played and I had sung for my performance, and he came to me, he was like, "You should just sing." And I was just kind of like, well, why can't I play and sing? And I remember having this internal conversation for those years, like, well, maybe I should just play because people think that women can't play. And if I could just be the best that I could be, then maybe I could go somewhere with it. And I didn't sing. I kept it a secret.
Wow, wow. But then eventually you did wind up singing. Yeah.
Eventually I did. What ended up happening was, I mean, I was doing it, but I just didn't let anybody know. But once I got to college, again, Mike Carbone, he realized I could do it. He was like, why are you not singing? And I was like, well, people always assume that women suck as a player. So I figured, let me try to work on being a player. But then also, I felt like I didn't want people to just assume that I was a singer when that happens all the time with women. No offense to vocalists, but for instrumentalists, it's always assumed like, oh, you're the vocalist in the band. I guess
Yeah.
society has a way of associating, well, if you're a woman and you're around a bunch of guys, you're the singer. When it's like, well, no, there's nothing bad with that. It's great. But there is a possibility that the person is an instrumentalist and they might have it on their back and you're just not looking.
Yeah.
Even if they have it on their back, you're still not looking.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I felt kind of conflicted, and I just kept it a secret. But he encouraged me to sing, and once I got out of college, all my mentors, they were like, you need to sing. Because then I thought, well, if I'm going to be a saxophonist and I spent time playing saxophone, maybe I should just play saxophone, because I don't want to try to bite on another thing that I never invested the time in. And they were the ones that were like, listen, you could sing on a professional level, literally. Like, you're playing and you're singing. And it took me a second to kind of accept that, because I was like, no, I didn't put the work, I didn't do it. And they're like, no, you're born with a gift. You do both equally well, and you do it uniquely well because you approach it from the understanding of an instrumentalist.
I was gonna mention that, yeah, because I saw one of your recordings, There Will Never Be Another You. And yeah, no, that was really cool because, no background music, nothing. You sang and you played.
Yeah.
And I'm going to digress. I have to, because I'm sitting there, I'm like, she's scatting like an instrumentalist. Absolutely. Like, right? Like Ella Fitzgerald, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing too, and I was going to ask you this question, like how you approach learning standards and stuff like that. And we'll get into that in a second, but you did something really different with that tune. You didn't sing that melody the way, like we kind of know it. You did your own thing with that. And so my question was going to be, how did you, what was your thought process in doing that? Like, obviously you had to know the tune well enough, in its original state, but what's your thought process? How do you do that? How do you approach a standard to do that?
That's a great question. That particular video we did, it was a spur of the moment. I didn't even practice it. I ended up just kind of randomly playing along because they joked with me. It was like, oh, you should accompany yourself. And I was like, okay. And I started doing it, and then they caught it on tape. But
I'm going to put the link in the show notes. I have to.
Yeah. But it's interesting because for me, I spent so much of my early teens listening to a lot of Sarah and listening to a lot of Dexter. And for Sarah, I was in love with how she phrased the freedom and how she expressed herself through the melody. And the same thing with Dexter. And for me, anytime I'm learning a standard, of course, you're learning first off the real original standard for what it is, so that you can understand the lyrics, the story behind it, the melody, the phrasing of it. But then you experiment and try to figure yourself out through trying things. And for me, it was like, well, how can I phrase this in a way where I'm balancing accompanying myself, what a saxophonist would do, but then also phrasing with the freedom of a vocalist, but being those two people in one.
That's right. One woman band.
Yeah, and it's a good challenge. If you could sing and play, I encourage people out there to try it. But it was a very great practice for me to do, because it really taught me the importance of phrasing and also space, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I saw that particular video, and that really, really struck me because the twists and turns that you did with that were different than what I expected, and that's where you said one of your mentors said you have a unique skill, a unique approach, and that's why that spurred that question. So when you're approaching any types of standards, so you're like, you just as a recap, you said you have to learn that standard in its original form, like finding a recording as close to that as possible, right? And studying it from there. And then where do you, in your mind, like where are you making the differences, the changes, the uniqueness? Like what are you thinking in terms of that? Just exploring different harmonic notes or
Well, it's a combination of that and also checking out as many artists as you can that cover that version, that cover that song, different versions, because then it gives you ideas. Okay, I might like this one, or I might not like this, or I might do this a little differently, or I might keep this. And as you're exploring and listening, you're trying it out so that by the time you get to the bandstand, you forget everything so that you have the freedom to be in that zone because you have an idea and understanding of how you're going to work with that space and how you're hearing it and how you're going to be able to improvise in that space. Yeah.
Okay, what you just said was actually like a tweetable, because the thing is that you basically said you're working on it, you're studying it, all that kind of stuff, but when you're on the bandstand, you forget about it, so that
Mm-hmm.
you could be free to do
Mm-hmm.
what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how
Yeah.
a lot of people, I think, get caught up with the fact that they think that they need to memorize certain licks, put them in certain spots.
No, everything has a function. Like when it comes to jazz, it's about the function, being able to hear and see, well, hear and understand, well, how am I going to react to that? Or am I going to give it space and just let it be and then maybe react after the fact? Or am I going to be proactive? Am I going to be reactive? That's what makes this music great. It's not about punching a lick because that might not necessarily be called for at that moment in time in the song.
That's really cool. And then even you're just using the words like being proactive and reactive. So when you're soloing, like, what else is going on through your mind when you're on that stage?
How it feels, the music, most importantly, because then that's what kind of leads the way. And then of course, I'm listening to how the rhythm section is playing, and I'm not thinking methodically and like, okay, I'm gonna do this, but no, I'm listening to what's happening and oh, let me try this and do it, and then see how they react. But then also listening to what they do, and I'm reacting off of them too. But then also, most importantly, I'm just trying to explore that space as freely as possible without any constraints of okay, I'm gonna put this specific chord or scale on this blah blah blah. No, I'm just listening and it's like a conversation basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is really great. So having this conversation and stuff, you're thinking about space, you're thinking about, joining in the conversation, so to speak, maybe
Mhm.
perhaps thinking about the melodic line,
Yeah, melodic
direction.
line, color, juxtaposition.
And you have to have obviously a tremendous amount of ability on your instrument in order to bring that out.
Yeah, that's the thing. You got to spend the time to be able to access it and activate it on your instrument. That's where most people have the problem because it's like, okay, I practice all this at home and it works. But when I get in advanced and it doesn't, it's like, well, you didn't practice applying it. And you didn't practice being in a situation where you don't have anything in front of you and all you have is to react or be proactive. And that involves being able to have the muscle memory to get to your instrument.
And just that word, practice applying it. I always say to people, you know, you have to practice performing. You have to practice as if
Yeah.
you're performing.
Yeah, that and also practice playing with as many people as possible because it's always going to be a different game every time you play, whether it's the same group or with different musicians. So that muscle in itself of how do you develop getting to your essence of who you are and being able to fit for whatever's happening at that moment, you got to practice that.
Wow. And it's funny because just going back to a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
like I've never met you before, but we're having this conversation and we're reacting, we're
Mm-hmm.
proacting by asking questions, and you're saying certain things, and I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, and you know what I mean? So it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
And the thing is that if we didn't have a good enough command of the English language, we wouldn't have a good enough conversation.
Right. Right. And that's, of course, where we have the vocabulary to be able to make words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, and paragraphs into beautiful stories. It's the same thing with music.
Absolutely. That's awesome. It's such a great analogy. So now I'm going to get into some like tips, technical types of things, and you shared so much when it comes to like approaching a standard. Let's talk about in terms of tone, and people will be curious about your equipment. So what equipment are you playing? Of course, right? It's always about the equipment.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been really, I'm kind of floating between these two mouthpieces. But one is by a company I endorse, D'Addario Woodwinds.
Got it.
And they have a Select Jazz Marble series, which is a great mouthpiece. I love playing on that. But then also lately, I've been mixing it up, playing with my old vintage summer soloist, Short Shank.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm actually writing down some notes right now. But what's interesting is that it's both hard rubber, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Hard rubber is where, I mean, no offense to metal mouthpiece enthusiasts, but hard rubber is where the sound is.
Right. That's where you're at. Yeah, at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm going to also assume that you're also playing D'Addario reeds too.
Yes, I use a Jazz Selects 3 medium, and I use a Francois Louis ligature.
Got it. Okay. And in terms of your horn?
My horn is, right now, I've been using a old vintage Summer Mark 6.
Cool. It's funny that you say old vintage. I mean, mine is actually older than me, too.
Mine too.
It's going to be for you, of course.
It's way older. I got to tell you the story of how I got it too.
Go ahead, tell us.
Okay, well, this was before it had an accident, because I had a summer, basically when I was, how old was I? I was about 14 or 13, and I was going to an audition for a jazz camp, and I wanted to play alto, and they were like, listen, we have too many altos, you got to play tenor. And I was like, I'm not playing the tenor. Do you see that thing? It's big, it's huge, it's low, it's ugly. They're going to make fun of me because I'm short and I got to carry this big thing around with me. No. And the kids in school sound terrible. No. Like, I'm not going to be one of them. That's what I'm thinking in my head at like 13, 14 years old.
Too funny.
Like, the flute is pretty. Tenor, ugh. And my teacher was just like, hey, listen, we can get you a scholarship. And my mom was like, scholarship? How much you talking? And they were like, full ride. And my mom was like, you're going to play tenor. And I was like, they're going to make fun of me. So I ended up going to my aunt's house, because my aunt was like a second mom to me. And she was like, baby, what's wrong? And I was pouting, and I was like, they want me to play tenor. I hate the tenor. I play the flute. The alto sax was cooler. And her mother-in-law was there, and she's like, what's wrong? And I told her the same sob story. And she's like, oh, I got one upstairs in my closet. And I was like, what? So she ended up letting me go upstairs. And it was kind of like a version of the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but for musicians, the saxophone version. We're going to have to do like an animated thing with this maybe one day. And I'm like climbing up the stairs. It's dark. And I get to the second floor, and the whole floor is dark except for one little crack out of a room that you see, like the light peeping out. And something just told me, go in that room. And I was like, okay. And I opened the door. The door's like, slowly opening. And then the room looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There's papers everywhere and whatnot, and old stuff from, I guess, probably the 60s, 70s. Wow. And I went in the room, and I went into the closet, and it was like only one closet. And I opened the door, and it was like a 1967 Mark VI Selmer, the original case, with a receipt for $500.
Oh my gosh.
And it was in mint condition.
Oh, wow.
So I brought it downstairs, and she's like, listen, that's it. You can use it as long as you need to. And I'm standing there like in shock, like, she wasn't joking. She got a tenor. And I didn't know in my head at that time, like, this is like a vintage horn. So I brought it to my band teacher, Mr. Archer. And I was like, hey, Mr. Archer, I got something for you to look at.
Oh, my gosh. I can only imagine.
And he's like, all right, what you got, Thurman? And I pulled it out, and his face was just like, oh, don't like, you drop that thing out.
Yep. Oh, my God, because like my face was right now when he's mentioned that.
And he was so sweet, because he was like, give me the horn. And I was like, well, why? He's like, I'm going to go take it to get overhauled because the pads, of course, were falling out because it hadn't been touched in 30 years. And he was like, I'm going to take it to the repair guy and get it back to you, okay? And I was just like, okay. And he gave it to me, and I used that horn all throughout my early development up until my career, up until I had an accident. But that was how I got my horn.
Wow, that's, oh my gosh, that horn is worth, what, seven, maybe even $10,000. I mean, you know, that's crazy. Original condition and everything like that. Now,
Yeah.
so now what are you playing?
Tenor Madness.
Ah, okay, yeah. Another friend of mine, actually, that I just interviewed, Augie Bello, plays a Tenor Madness, and he was
Yeah.
playing it years before, like, I think other people heard about it. There was a shop, I think, in Astoria or something like that, where his teacher at the time brought him there, and those are great horns.
Yeah, they're great horns. When I had my accident, my mentor, he was the one that hit me to them, Antoine Roney. And when I played it, I was like, whoa, it's like the best of both worlds. It's like you get the feeling of a six, but then you get the power of and the cut of like a con almost too. And I kind of like that combination, and I ended up kind of sticking with it for a while.
And those horns, I mean, the good advantage of some of the modern horns now, because there's a lot of good ones on the market now.
Hmm.
Intonation, like the Mark Sixes, are known for spotty intonation, certain years and stuff like that.
Yeah, you kind of, it's like picking fine wine. You got to know what you're looking for with the sixes, and just keep your fingers crossed that it's going to hold up and last as long as you're
Yes,
good to it.
that's very true, and I love that story leading up to it. Because here's the thing.
Yeah.
Here's how we know that you're a great improviser, because the way you just told that story, you gave me and the listeners an image in our minds of what you went through when you first found that tenor, and that's why I
Yeah.
like the surprise,
Yeah.
the surprise factor. I think it's so awesome. That's so
Yeah.
cool. All right, well, now let me ask you, can you share like maybe one tip on, whether it's developing your tone or maintaining your tone for our listeners?
Sure. Well, when it comes to developing your tone, you want to find people that you love and admire. For me, I found Dexter Gordon, and the reason why I loved his sound was because it was fat, it was rich, it was huge, it was full. And then also he had a way of playing with certain colors, so that with that one note, he could play it so many different ways. Just from hearing him play a ballad to hearing him play a samba, or even something fast and up tempo. So you want to find those players that you gravitate towards, and then of course transcribe them. And I don't just mean transcribe the notes and just kind of play it and spit it back out. No, really transcribe to try to catch the essence of that sound and how they're phrasing and shaping the music with their sound. And of course, long tones. Long tones, they're like weight training for us, because it helps us be able to find a way to get our sound direct and clear and full and find that consistency. A lot of times when we practice, we might gravitate towards focusing on the middle of our horn, but it's important and essential that we practice long tones so that the top of the horn is equivalent to the middle of the horn, and it's equivalent to the bottom of the horn as far as fullness and sound and ease of getting through the horn. So that top part of the horn shouldn't be thin. It should be just as full as it is in the middle. And the bottom shouldn't just be spread and big, but it should be just as full and controlled as it is in the middle.
And when you practice your long tones, are you also thinking, you mentioned like how Dexter Gordon plays with colors. So are there certain days where, you know what, I want to try for this color on my long tones? Do you ever think that way?
I just try it out and experiment. I had a great teacher and mentor by the name of Hamid Blewett, and he would sit with me and he would just say, listen, with this one note, I could play it. I'm figuring an A. He'd be playing like maybe his A on his baritone, and he would just play. He would just try just figuring it out, which is manipulating whatever he's doing with his embouchure to change the color and the sound, make it bright, make it full, make it soft, make it light, make it really heavy, make it very, I don't want to say brassy, but very vivid. Just to sit and experiment with it. Just one note. You, of course, experiment with different dynamics, because the range and dynamic is going to affect the color too. If you're playing something really soft, see if you can make it soft, but with a straight tone. See if you can make it soft, but with a whispery tone. See if you could play it, but soft, and it be a full sound, not necessarily loud, but something with weight.
Yeah, and the word that comes to mind, and of course this is in the Sigurd Rascher book, Top Tones, is tonal imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. You're coloring with your tone.
Yeah, with the colors. All right, cool. Now in terms of like one technical exercise that, you couldn't live without or you felt was really important in your growth and development, what would that
Mm-hmm.
be?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, of course, scales.
Right. I guess I should say aside from scales, like
Okay.
or what you would do with scales.
Um, I like to play them all the way from the bottom to the top consecutively, going up half step. So low B flat all the way up to maybe I play 2 octaves. Sometimes I actually like to do the full range and just trying to get that the muscle memory to be maneuvering and get that tempo happening at a consistent speed. But take 2 octaves, low B flat all the way up to the ninth of the scale, back down, then go a half step, same thing, and just run them back to back to back to back. Do it at a tempo that is consistent for all of them, because sometimes you'll find you might trip up over the F sharps and the G's, especially when you get into the altissimo, but slow it down because that's the goal. You're trying to get through the full range of the horn. You're trying to keep the sound consistent for the entire range, but then also you're trying to keep the facilities smooth so that when you get to the altissimo, it's just like playing in the bottom of the horn.
Right, right. Cool. Great tip. Now, let me ask you another question. I was thinking about this, especially as women. Do you find that the topic of breath support, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, our lungs, well, I'm small. I don't know if you're still small. Yeah, we're small. So we
Small and
have to,
mighty.
that's right. Well, there's a small woman who was a principal tubist for the Philadelphia Orchestra for quite a while. Her name is escaping me right now, but we have to be more efficient with our breath support. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, you got to work at it.
And
One
how do
exercise,
you work at it? Yeah.
this exercise was actually showed to me by Walter Blanding, and you just play with a straight tone, super, super quiet for as long as you can, and you hold it out. And it's hard because you're going to be feeling like you're wavering. But the goal is to push yourself so that each time you get to the next note, it's a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And you want to start, you can start in the middle of the horn and work your way up, and you can start back in the middle of the horn, work your way down. But the goal is to keep it steady. That I find helps with air support because you're working on your endurance and how to ration your air as you're spending it.
Yes, especially
Yeah.
especially for those pesky low notes.
Yeah, the low notes it's tricky because we, especially for tenor, we always want a subtone, but you got to learn how to do a straight tone and keep the air support still steady and the air stream flowing. Because if you think about it, the velocity of the air is changing for different parts of the horn. So for the lower parts, because it's a lower note, the wave is much slower or much wider, so you need even more support. So you have to figure out how much speed or how much pressure do I need to push the air out in order to support the sound and keep the volume and not let the sound dissipate. And the same with the upper register. It's faster, figure out that speed and pressure that's going to work.
Right, and the resistance that you have to
Right.
put inside yourself
Yeah.
and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Cool, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now,
Sure. Of
I know we only have like a couple of minutes left. I want to thank you for your time, but I
course.
we're filming this in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and we're both in states where we're still in self quarantine, and it's
Yeah.
been really really hard for musicians, especially like yourself too. Where you're performing large stages, you've got these big gigs, and you're seeing everything's getting canceled. I just
Yeah.
want to know, number one, how you're dealing with that, and what are there any projects coming up for you?
You
Um,
know,
months.
it took a second because it was a shock. When they told us we were going to be shut down literally the next day, we were supposed to play at Dizzy's Club for an entire weekend. My band was supposed to play there, and we literally got canceled the night before. And my heart sank because it was just like, we got a full weekend in New
Yeah.
York City, and it's not happening. And then after the next couple of days, everything started canceling. And then we found out the rest of the year was canceled. And then we started finding out that for the following year, things were starting to shift. And for me, I was a little bit kind of, not, I guess, in a weird kind of shock. Not shock as like, but shock as in like numb, like,
yeah,
how do we make sense of this? This doesn't make any sense. And also sometimes you feel like, man, you work hard, you make those steps to make things happen. And then finally it's like, okay, some things are falling in place. And then this pandemic happens and it's like, well, wow, how are we going to literally pay rent? And how are we going to keep food on the table? And for musicians, our career thrives on people coming together. We bring people together through our music. And to not be able to do that, it's like, you stole my heart.
Yeah.
So I took about a good month and a half to just kind of be quiet and think. Because a lot of times as musicians, we're so pressured, but we got to hustle, 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 hustle. If we're not hustling, this is not good. And I realized that, that's not healthy for musicians, even though that's part of our life. But particularly at this time right now, where we're forced to stay still, sometimes that's the best thing to do. Even though we're worried and we're concerned about the pressures of literally where we're going to live, how we're going to eat. For your mental sanity, for your physical health, sometimes it's good to sit down and just be still. So I sat still for a while. I didn't pressure myself to write the next best big thing or to practice 50 million hours a day. I took it one day at a time, even literally just organizing music, sitting on the floor, going through 10 years of music. And I slowly built myself to a point where I was like, okay, now I cleared my head. I know what I want to do. So I've been doing little projects now. I just launched a series called The Haven Hang, which is a question and answer advice hour for young women musicians. And
Awesome.
I encourage educators as well as teachers and older women musicians and big sisters to join in the conversation and asking questions, and I answer and give advice. I've been working on some other projects as well, which hopefully should be coming out soon. I'll let you know.
Great. Yes, please do that.
NPR is working on a series called Alone Together, and I myself along with drummer Daryl Green, we're going to be releasing a video soon, so it should be out soon, hopefully.
Oh, that's great.
And then, of course, just taking personal time to really think about how you can use your space within this time, because for most of us musicians, we're used to using our space as a musician in one particular way. But this period has taught me, how can we still reach the people in other ways? Okay, we might not be able to play together in the same room, but how can we help our community? For me, I felt like I had an urge to want to reach out to young women musicians, because I thought about it, I was like, man, they're probably sitting at home too, bummed not being able to play. And many times we have questions that we don't really get to have answered because we don't access those people. So shoot, let me find a way to bring people together and let's talk. Let's figure it out. That's been one of my ways. And of course, I've been seeing other musicians doing the same thing, hosting virtual interviews with musicians that they admire. Reading books. For me, I've been reading the autobiography of Dexter Gordon. Mm-hmm. And that's been so soothing to me because I'm getting to learn about my hero through the words from his wife. And it's giving me a deeper understanding. So when I listen to his records now, it's like, okay, I kind of feel like I know the person a little bit more, but just things like that.
That's awesome. And to wrap this up, and I'm going to, before I wrap it up, to Haven Hang, do you have a URL? Do you have information on that?
As of now, it's what you can do is you can go to my Instagram page at Camille Thurman, or my Facebook page, which is Camille Thurman Music. Okay. And I'll be posting announcements for the next upcoming session.
Okay, that's really good to know. And how long will you be holding these Haven Hangs for?
As long as this quarantine lasts.
Okay, no, this is really good because this leads to my overall arching theme. You're paying it forward. You're paying it forward because the mentor that you didn't have at that young age, you've become that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, seriously, you
Thank
have,
you.
and it's so interesting. Your whole story is so inspiring, and just the fact that, I'm so glad that you went to Binghamton and you found the role models, the mentors that you needed, and then you quickly realized, okay, I need to make good relationships with these people and maintain them, and you built a networking, system for yourself that really helped you, and you've learned from that, and now you're becoming that mentor to other people that may not have anyone to look up to, and it saddens me that these types of bullying things are going on amongst women, against women, and even against young boys as well, but that it's still going on. But just the fact that you're you know maybe the one good thing that came from this pandemic is that you're doing these types of things so that you can pay it forward at this moment and really truly inspire the next generation like you had said you wanted to do.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you
it's
so
really cool.
much.
I think it's so awesome. So, all right, so we have your Instagram, we have your Facebook, your
Oh,
website is.
my website is www.camillethurmanmusic.com. And you just reminded me if they want to find out more about the Haven Hang or just follow what I'm doing or find my music, they can leave their email because I have a newsletter that I send out monthly. So they could just leave their email on the first page when they find it, and I'll be in touch.
On your website, you mean?
Yes, on my website.
Good.
Yes.
Okay,
I'm
good.
trying to
Yeah.
find the words.
Excellent. No, it's all good. It's very good. That's very important. So you have a newsletter, and
Yeah.
I will be putting those links in the show notes. And I think it's so great what you're doing. It's so inspiring, and this was really fun. I'm so glad I got a chance to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me do this. I'm happy Rulon connected us. And hey, Rulon, love you. Mwah.
And she's talking about Rulon from Key Leaves. And I was working the NAM booth with Rulon, doing the podcast there, and also helping out with Key Leaves. And he brought us together. So yes, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Rulon. So much appreciated. Listen, Camille,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
thank you. Thanks so much for having me.